Greetings, Butterfly Tribe, and welcome back to The Way You See Me Heart Healing Ministry. Today we're going to resume with our series on healing from childhood trauma. The last recording we left off on part 1 of senior year of high school. Today we will resume with part 2. Part 1 described what was going on at school. This particular part will describe what is going on in my home life at the same time. We will open up with scripture. Psalms 71, starting at verse 1. It is written, "In you, O YAHUAH, I have taken refuge. Let me never be ashamed. In your righteousness, deliver and rescue me. Incline your ear to me and save me. Be to me a rock to dwell in, to give in to continually, to go into continually. You have given the command to save me, for you are my rock and my stronghold. Rescue me, O my Almighty One, out of the hand of the wrong, out of the hand of the unrighteous and cruel. For you are my expectation. Master YAHUAH, my trust from my youth. Upon you I have leaned from my birth. You took me out of my mother's womb. My praise is continually of you." May YAHUAH add a blessing to the readers, hearers, and the doers of his set-apart word. This covers August or fall 1994 through May or spring of 1995, the changes that I was going through at home. I'm going to open with giving a brief description of how a typical day started for me at the age of 16, going into my senior year of high school. I was 16, my younger brother was 14, my baby sister was 12. I was in 12th grade, my brother was entering into his freshman year of high school, my sister was going into her 7th grade year of middle school. I had a baby at home who was less than a year old at this time, and I was attending high school. So a typical morning consisted of me getting up early in the morning to make sure everything my daughter needed was prepared while I was at school. I went to school a half a day that year. So most mornings, my mother would not be at home. She would be at a friend's house. So either I would have to bring my daughter to her, or either I prepared a bag and everything she needed for a few hours, and my grandmother would keep her until I got home at around noon. I had to make sure that my siblings were dressed and ready for school. My brother now attended school with me, so we rode the bus together. My sister, of course, walked to school with her friends, but I made sure that they were up and ready for school each morning. My grandmother had been sick most of my childhood. She had heart disease and diabetes. By the time I came along, my grandmother had been diagnosed and had a miracle performed in her life from cancer. They found cancer. She went to this prayer meeting where they prayed over her, anointed her. When she went back to the doctor, there were no signs of cancer in her, so it was considered a miracle. But that was before I was even born. In middle school, she started to get sicker. And my cousin and I had another female cousin who's like 3 years older than I am. And while she would be in the hospital, one of us would stay the night with her. We never allowed her to stay overnight in the hospital alone. Someone was always with her. My grandmother was the rock of our family. She loved us all. She stepped in and did what she had to do. My siblings and I moved into our grandparents' house when I was like 14 years old. My mother and my stepfather had separated. My mother was now suffering from or dealing with a drug addiction. And I think one of the greatest acts of love she did for us was she moved us in with our grandparents so that we would be looked after and we would be safe. And I'm grateful for that, because my grandmother's house had always been a family house. Her siblings had taken turns living there, in need. I had 2 older cousins that stayed there, whose mom, they had been living with my grandparents most of their lives because my auntie needed their help. She had a mental or intellectual disability, and she was married at one point and had 2 kids, and my grandparents helped her with her children. She passed away when I was 11, so we moved in with my grandparents, those 2 cousins at the time, my siblings, and my mom. And like I said, her siblings, especially the brother, would come and go. So it was always a house full of people. But my grandmother began to get sicker, and they scheduled for her to have surgery. My mother had been in this addiction now over 3 years. It basically had taken over her life. I could remember praying and even watching my grandmother pray for her to be delivered from this addiction. I watched her health deteriorate, and at this point in senior year, she was also getting sick, suffering with high blood pressure and different things. She had a partial hysterectomy my senior year. She was hospitalized a few times. And what I also watched and, going on was family members, male cousins, and people that I had grew up with in the community selling my mother crack cocaine. And everyone knew. That's how I felt. Everyone watched her struggle. They watched us struggle. But people closest to me, I watched cousins disrespect my mother, call her out her name, say degrading things about her openly in streets. And I was constantly defending my mother. And I'm not blaming them for her addiction, but I am blaming them for the role they played in it by supplying it for her. So while this was going on, as I said, my grandmother got sicker and she required open heart surgery. And at some point my senior year, she had that surgery, and this strong woman that I would see praying and holding up her family was now in a weakened state. And shortly after my grandmother had her open heart surgery, my grandfather had a stroke and was paralyzed on one side of his body. And so both of them were at home, and my mother did the bulk of the care for them in the home. Her brothers would come and assist with my grandfather for his integrity purposes, but my mother, who had been a CNA, took care of them. She fixed their meals. Her and her sisters who lived in town. At one point, my grandmother, because of the diabetes, her wounds were healing on the outside, but the inside was wide open. They took her back into surgery and reopened up her chest and sent her home like that, to where she was healing or attempting to heal inside out. I can remember assisting my mother with the bandage changes of my grandmother and looking into her chest wall and being able to see her heart. She would cry out in so much pain. At night, once my mom had got them settled in for the night, she would leave and she would go take care of her needs for her addiction. So it would be my siblings and I, and even my daughter. My cousins would be there, and I can remember hearing my grandmother cry out for her mother or her sisters, her brothers that had passed along. And most of these people had been gone before I was even born, but she would call out for them all hours of the night. And so it broke my heart to see her in so much pain, to hear her in pain. And because she would cry out at night, my sleep was still affected. But it didn't matter. Every day I had to get up and the same routine had to take place. My daughter ended up having to spend more time with her father's parents so that I could attend school, or because my mom had her hands full. I had to make sure my siblings did their homework and help take care of them. I made sure that they were in at an appropriate time. And I watched life just take its course. Because my grandmother and my grandfather were sick now, the support that I once felt from my grandmother, the stability, was gone. She couldn't help me because she was struggling to help herself. And then I had this guilt, wondering if I assisted in the progression of her disease process by her helping us. Before my grandfather had his stroke, I can remember sitting in the living room, a living room full of people. And I can remember where I was sitting that day on the couch. And he had this chair that he always sat in, and he was sitting in his chair in the living room, and he got up from that chair and he walked into the kitchen. And when he came back from the kitchen, he walked over to me, and with the blade side of a butcher knife, he hit me across my face with that knife. And I can remember my mom jumping up and responding, and she was very upset. And no one knew why he did this, because it was totally a normal day. This was totally, completely out of character. And they said that he was suffering with early signs of Alzheimer's. But what I couldn't figure out was a man that had only probably hit me once with a belt in my entire 17 years of life. A man that I loved, the man that I took his name, the man that I saw as a strong provider for his family, protected his family, out of nowhere. And why me? Why, of all the people sitting in that living room, did I become the target of his anger or whatever was going through his mind? Until today, I don't know. I don't know who I reminded him of, where he traveled back to. But it shattered my image of him. And I was grateful. Even in those moments, the Most High protected me. He kept me. He kept me. And at one point, I forgot how to pray. And my only prayer would be, I would get up and I would thank him for keeping me alive and thank him for keeping me enclosed in my right mind. Because so often I felt the enemy was targeting my sanity. My brother played basketball. And although he hated school, he was a hell of a basketball player. He was dunking in middle school, and all the coaches wanted him to play. And I would make sure that he got up and went to school every day. It became so bad that days that I couldn't get him to go, his high school coach would come and pick him up in the mornings for school. And the bus literally stopped right in front of our grandparents' house. But they would come and pick him up. He had schools from the next city over wanting to pay for him to go to the private school to get him on their team. They wanted to move my mother to Lake Charles for him to play on the team. And at the time, I struggled to understand how it always seemed like the people who didn't want opportunities got them. People fought over them. And then those who worked hard were overlooked. But I made sure he got to school. And his freshman year of school, both he and my sister, they did okay. They didn't like school. Neither one of them liked school. They could care less about school. But as their older sister, I made sure that they got to school. I helped them with their homework. And I did the best I could to try and motivate them to look for something better than what we had been given. My grandmother continued to get sicker. My mother got deeper and deeper into her addiction. It got closer and closer to the end of the school year, and I was trying to make a decision of what I was going to do with the rest of my life. So when I did not get a scholarship offer that summer, I did visit what was called the University of Southwest Louisiana with a friend of mine who had graduated a couple years before me, and she attended there. So when she went to take care of some summer stuff, I went with her and stayed like a week in Lafayette got the application. I applied. I was accepted. I filled out for financial aid. It would take for me to get a grant and a student loan to attend school. But at this point, I had to do something. I needed something to look forward to, something to work towards. I still wanted to be a nurse. So I applied to the nursing program. I attended that fall. So I guess this recording went a little to the summer months leading up to me leaving home, but that was my senior year. And while all of this was going on the home front, I was taking losses at school that took a toll on me. But I still had some fight left in me, and I wasn't just ready to give up yet. The main thing that happened in that senior year was I saw my superhero lose strength. And I think out of all the things that happened, watching my grandmother suffer was more traumatic than anything I had ever experienced thus far in life. Childbirth, the losses, all of it. Watching her suffer traumatized me the most. Thank you for watching. Please join us again for the Way You See Me Heart Healing Ministry. My next recording will be me leaving home and the effects of that. Join us again next time for the Way You See Me Heart Healing Ministry. Be blessed.